Welcome to another episode of The Unseen Paranormal, where some of the scariest things are unseen. I'm your host, Eric Freeman. Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. Today we're talking to Mike Ricksecker. Mike is a paranormal investigator, ghostorian, speaker, and author of numerous books, including Ghosts and Legends of Oklahoma, Ghosts of Maryland, Deadly Heirs, and more. But today we're going to discuss shadow people in his book, A Walk in the Shadows, The Complete Guide to Shadow People. Second edition was just released, and the book has been called The Definitive Guide to Shadow People. Welcome to the show, Mike. Thank you for joining us today.
Oh, thanks for having me, Eric. Absolutely appreciate it.
So you are considered an expert on the shadow figure phenomenon, the stories. So for people that don't know, there are probably a lot of people that are familiar with shadow figures, but what are shadow figures?
Yeah, that's a great question because there's a lot of different things that these shadow entities could be. So what I believe a quote unquote true shadow person is an interdimensional being, something or someone from another plane of existence. But these things could also just be a human spirit that can't fully manifest as an apparition. It only comes off as a shadow. Some of them may be extraterrestrials or time travelers. There's a lot of different possibilities out here. And as I've done my research, I've discovered that it's really individual for each shadow entity what it may actually be.
And there are different types of shadow figures that people see. What are all the different types, and do you believe they're all interdimensional beings, or there are some that can be just spirits that show up as a shadow?
Yeah, some could be just spirits that show up as a shadow. For one reason or another, they don't have enough energy to fully manifest as an apparition, and so you just see the form of the person. It may be like my friend Rob Guttrow. And I have a story with him in the book, A Walk in the Shadows, where it was his aunt that came to visit him at night, and she had traveled a great distance, didn't have enough energy to fully form, but was there at least in shadow form and wanted Rob to deliver a message to his mother. He's a psychic medium, so he's a little in tune there. But yeah, there are a lot of different varieties here. There's the classic humanoid figure, just looks like a person, like the outline of a person, but no features, and you don't see any facial detail, like no eyes, no nose, no mouth, nothing like that. It just looks like a human being. Then there are those entities that wear the hats, and they're very similar to a humanoid figure, but they're wearing different style hats, sometimes other clothing as well. So, it could be like a fedora and a trench coat, or a top hat and a cape, that sort of thing. You have your hooded figures, which a lot of people try to liken to the Grim Reaper, but it's not the Grim Reaper. But you almost kind of think of like a monk, but all in black, that sort of thing. You also have like your mists and your wisps. These are very different varying types. So like a mist would be a large black cloud of vapor, and a wisp would be something very fast, very faint, quite translucent, and you're only catching like a real glimpse of it. Then there's also your crawler, and these things are they're very fast. They get down on all fours, kind of like their namesake, and they'll crawl across the floor, across the walls, the ceiling. And then there's the old hag, and that's where we're getting to the sleep paralysis and those entities that end up sitting on your chest when you wake up in the middle of the night, or they could actually be standing in the corner of the room, but still has that look of the old hag.
To become a researcher and investigator into the shadow figure phenomenon, you've had some experiences yourself.
I have, yeah. I've had quite a few experiences. My very first one was I was only about 8 years old. I woke up in the middle of the night, and there was this tall, dark figure standing in the corner of my bedroom. I had no idea at the time that it was a shadow person or anything like that. I thought there was an intruder in the house, and it was about to kill me. Cause that's about what you think at 8 years old. But still allowed to tell the tale, which is great. I did do something very unusual, though, in which it actually approached my bed. I'm trying to scream. My mouth opens up. Nothing's coming out. It leaned over. I'm looking up into its face. And, again, there's, nothing there. No eyes, no nose, no mouth. Nothing. It's just all black. It actually grabbed me by the wrists, crossed my arms across my body, and then it ran off down the hall. Absolutely bizarre. And so I finally found my legs, found my voice, ran off to my parents' bedroom screaming. But they, tried to calm me down, tried to tell me I'd only had a bad dream, but I was awake for this whole thing, and that was, the first of many. My next one, about 5 years down the road, when I was 13 years old, we were moving into a new house in Ohio. We were previously in Massachusetts, moved, several 100 miles away to Ohio, and it's just unpacking boxes, putting things away, and there was this figure standing in my doorway. But it was a little bit different than the one that I experienced when I was a kid, when I was 8, because this one was more translucent, wasn't really fully formed, and every time I turned and looked, it would run off. And it did this several times. I'd be putting things away in my bedroom, unpacking something, and it would stand there, and I'd look at it and take off. And so I ended up asking my mother about it. And apparently she thought that I was a little bit more, mature for my age at that point. But she said that she had also seen it. But she did it in such a way that, I wasn't alarmed. She was just kind of matter of fact, oh, yeah, I've seen it. So, the affirmation was fantastic. And because she wasn't alarmed about it, I wasn't alarmed about it. And I decided to get playful with the thing and started calling him Tom, like Peeping Tom, because he was always peeping in my door. So,
Yeah.
And that went on for about 3 or 4 months, and the activity subsided. So, those were my first couple of experiences at a young age. And as a paranormal investigator, I've had plenty of experiences.
Is there any type of experience that's typical? I know, being a paranormal investigator myself, I've heard of the black mist and kind of the crawler type shadow figures. I know there's a famous crawler shadow figure at Waverly Hills that kind of everybody's heard about, probably from watching some of the paranormal TV shows. But is there any that are more prevalent than others?
Yeah, probably the most common is the humanoid figure. That one that's just standing there in the corner of the room or at the end of your bed when you wake up in the middle of the night. That's really the most common story that I get. That and the one with the hat, where whether it's the humanoid figure that's standing in the room or the guy with the hat that's standing in the room. Those are the two most common. You usually hear of places like Waverly that have, some call them the crawler, some call them the creeper. I've actually seen one at Blackbird Church in Oklahoma. Other people around here at St. Joseph's Hospital had seen it. So that one's been seen a little bit more lately. The mists and the wisps, those get noticed a lot too. So I'll still always say that the humanoid figure is probably the most commonly seen one, but people see these shadows all the time. They're all over the place, and they have been seeing them for a long, long time.
Yeah, I've never saw one full on myself. I've caught what looks like a shadow, like out of the corner of my eye, moving, in the dark. It's kind of darker than the dark without any lights on, where there's no shadows or anything, but I've never seen one full on myself. And the experience that you had as a kid, that's kind of not a typical experience from what I've heard of shadow people of actually, like touching you and crossing your arms. They kind of generally just stand in the corner, right? And just kind of watch.
Yeah, most often they're watchers or observers, and we don't know what they're watching for or what they're observing. It's almost like you hear a lot of these ET encounters where they're very, very similar type of accounts where people wake up and they see some sort of like one of the grays or an extraterrestrial standing there, and they'll report the same sort of thing where the thing is standing there watching them and not doing anything. And then you get the abduction reports that are actually similar to old hag syndrome, where they have the sleep paralysis and they can't move, and then they're observing the ETs doing something to them, and that may have been similar to what I experienced, except the fact that I was moving. I didn't have sleep paralysis when that happened. It is a little bit more unusual to have a shadow entity actually touch you, and that one actually manipulated me. But you do on occasion get those reports. And, in fact, there was a woman who emailed me yesterday and actually reported, the same thing. She actually thanked me for, telling the story of, how it felt when it actually grabbed my wrist, because it didn't feel like anything special. People will ask me, did it feel, electric? Did it feel cold? And I said, no, it just felt like somebody, had grabbed me like any old person.
Right.
And she had actually had a very similar experience. Didn't grab her by the wrist, but when this particular shadow touched her, it was just like a regular person touching her. So, yeah, it's rare that you get those accounts of physical interaction, but they do happen.
And some people see shadow figures, and then other people will never see them. Have you come across that in your research and your investigations? And why do you think that is?
Yeah, that has to do with what I believe it has to do with personal resonance. That every person has a different vibratory level, and some people see more shadows than apparitions. Some people see more apparitions than shadows, and I just happen to be one of those that sees more shadows. And again, I think that has more to do with our own personal resonance, and it doesn't mean that somebody's a lower vibrational person. They're dark and evil or whatever. It doesn't mean that. It's just everybody has their own personal resonance. And a great example is it was at Mineral Springs Hotel in Alton, Illinois, almost 2 years ago now, and we had seen the apparition of a little girl morph out of rolling black smoke. So that's another example of how some of these are actually human spirits. But the way we all described the little girl, we all knew it was a little girl, but we all saw her a little different. Like I saw her from fully formed from the head down to her knees, and then she kind of disappeared around her knees. Others saw her more fully at the bottom and started disappearing toward the top of her head. Others just kind of like saw the torso, but could see her dress. So we all saw her a little differently, which kind of adheres to the idea that because we're all resonating at a little bit of a different level, that we're all vibrating a little bit of a different frequency, that we all saw her a little differently in that moment.
I've never heard that explanation before. I've talked to some other guests on the show where we've talked about that different people can see the same thing, but have a completely different experience, and how some skeptics latch onto that and say, well, that's proof that it didn't happen or whatever that. But that makes sense that, yeah, we're vibrating on this different frequency, each of us, and it's a little different. So we each have our own different experience when it comes to the paranormal and what we see and what we experience.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why, some people, when, they walk into a room, they're like, oh, I sense something in here, and other people don't, or they might sense or see something else. It's just, yeah, everybody's a little different. That's why, we each have our own different abilities and different traits. It's what makes each of us unique.
And a lot of people, I get probably from paranormal media, TV shows, and that type stuff, kind of go straight to shadow people are evil. What's kind of the consensus on that?
No, and that's one of the things that drives me absolutely crazy is, there are people out there who will say, and I know it plays great for television trying to say that they're all dark and they're all evil. And, I know of other people out there in the field that, try to teach about shadow people, and they'll do the same thing. They're, the darkest of the dark and the most evil of all evil entities. It's like, no, you're not going to tell me that the little girl that morphed out of black smoke is actually evil, or, Rob's aunt who appeared at the end of his bed but couldn't fully manifest as an apparition is evil. No, most of these, I believe that the majority of shadows that we encounter are actually some form of human spirits. We go investigating some house, some historic home that's been around forever, and we're seeing all this shadow play. And most of those are just former residents of the house, and they're just zipping about, cannot fully manifest. Some of them may actually be, time slips or what have you. I had an incident where it may have been some sort of time slip. It was certainly interdimensional. I'm walking into the kitchen of a restaurant. It was a haunted restaurant, and we were at the end of our investigation. And when I walked into this kitchen, just to do a last photo sweep, this just very faint wisp of a shadow darted across the room. Like I scared it, like took off. I totally scared the thing. And what was really interesting about that is you actually heard it slam into the metal door, the metal side door. But the door didn't move at all. It's just, a little flimsy thing that waiters and waitresses would carry large trays of food through. So I have a whole theory that I've mapped out on that. But yeah, sure, there are ones that are nasty and evil and malicious. Sure. I've encountered some of those. But it's going to sound really simplistic, but this is the way that I chalk it up. Some people are good. Some people are bad. Some shadow people are good. some shadow people are bad. I even have accounts in the book, A Walk in the Shadows, of ones that, are actually benevolent or are actually trying to help people. So, yeah, you have a wide variety of types of shadows, and they each have their own agenda.
More about shadow people with Mike Ricksecker right after this. Have you ever wanted to investigate a haunted location with TV's Ghost Hunters? Well, here's your chance. Join us April 9th at Historic Rosemont in Gallatin, Tennessee for a fun-filled evening with special guests Rochelle Stratton, Brian Murray, and Mustafa Gadalari from A&E's Ghost Hunters, along with guest investigators from Middle Tennessee's own Medics for Paranormal and Rutherford County Paranormal. VIP tickets include dinner, Q&A, meet and greet, photo op, and an investigation of the beautiful historic Rosemont with the Ghost Hunters. You don't want to miss this awesome event. To purchase tickets and for more information, go to unseenparanormalpodcast.com. Event presented by Flumeri Promotions and the Unseen Paranormal Podcast. And now back to the Unseen Paranormal. Yeah, and like you were saying, you got the monk type and then the hat man type and all the different types. And so yeah, that makes sense. And I've said that quite often on my show here about you have good people in life, and if they're assholes in life, they're going to be assholes in death.
Yeah, exactly.
What says that they're going to change? And so, yeah, so they might not have good intentions in death either. Throughout your research and investigating into the shadow figures, have you ever found a correlation between the witnesses that would say, okay, well, this group of witnesses, because they've had these experiences, or they have this in common, they might see the Hat Man, or this group might see the monk? I find it interesting, the correlation between what maybe people have in common, and that's maybe feeds into why they see a certain type or have certain experiences.
Yeah, I think that kind of goes back to what I was talking about before with personal resonance. I think some of those entities, they may consistently resonate across a spectrum that a particular type of person would be able to catch more of. It's like, the idea of, take a person who's never witnessed paranormal activity, and they don't believe anything or whatever, and all of a sudden they finally see their first ghost. And something just clicks in them, and all of a sudden they're seeing paranormal activity, all the time. I know people like that, and so I think what happens is when we start to interact with some of these entities a little bit more often than not, again, back to the personal resonance and vibration, that we start to almost attune to those frequencies. And so if we are consistently seeing a Hat Man entity, or we're consistently seeing a just regular humanoid figure, even if we're consistently seeing an apparition, that our frequency gets more attuned to those frequencies, and so we start seeing those things perhaps seemingly more often, but it's really just because we're more attuned to it that we're able to see them better.
Yeah, and you had mentioned sleep paralysis. And there's lots of stories of sleep paralysis out there, not just with shadow figures, but with just regular entities as well, regular spirits. I know, coming from the medical world, there's a medical explanation that that's a natural thing that your body does. And sometimes people can wake up before their brain unparalyzes them. And it's to keep you from hurting yourself in your sleep. So when it comes to the shadow figure phenomena, how does the sleep paralysis play into that? And how often does it happen with people?
Yeah, you're exactly right. It is a very natural biological thing. Just like you said, our body has this mechanism that prevents us from acting out our dreams while we sleep. And that's where sleep paralysis comes into play. Sometimes we wake up and our body hasn't fully gotten out of that paralysis state. It can happen the opposite way too, where all of a sudden your body just turns off and your brain is still awake. That I've experienced sleep paralysis, and that's the way it's happened to me a couple of times, and that my body was just so exhausted that it essentially turned off and I was paralyzed, but my brain and mind was still fully cognizant of everything going on around me, which is very disconcerting. The first time it happened to me, I was actually frightened. I didn't see any shadow people or anything like that, but it was one of those that, I'm at work. I was in the military at the time too. So it was like, if I get caught right now, it's some deep, deep shit. So yeah, so I was scared for a number of different reasons at that time. And, I finally got myself out of it. Just kind of started, wiggling a toe and, see if I could wiggle another, and then, okay, maybe I can wiggle my foot, and just kind of slowly worked up my body until I was awake. Again, saw no shadow people when this happened. And, a lot of people, when they do have sleep paralysis, don't see shadow people, but sometimes people do. Also, conversely, a lot of the people who've had shadow experiences aren't even asleep at the time. You're a paranormal investigator. You go out into a paranormal investigation. You're not sleeping. You're moving around. You might be sitting, but you're not crashed out. So,
right.
But you're seeing these shadows. So they're two different phenomena, and I have some bones to pick with the medical community because for one, they always try to chalk it up to the shadow people that we see when we wake up, or a hallucination from our dream. We have the paralysis going on, and the shadow is just part of the basically a waking dream, that we're dreaming of this thing as we're awake. But
right.
I always question, why is it always a person? But we dream about all kinds of things. We could dream about planes flying overhead. We could, maybe a train going through the room, motorcycles, cars, trees. I've had dreams of being on stage with Motley Crue, but I've never woken up 10,000 people in my room, pyrotechnics going off, and the drum kit and the guitars. That would be cool.
Right.
But it's never happened. It's always, for anybody that this happens to, it's always a person. So, it's not a hallucination. And the other thing is that two different types of phenomena happening at the same time is what's occurring here. Sleep paralysis is a very natural biological thing to experience. Shadow people are also a phenomenon, but supernatural to witness and experience. What I think is happening here, we each as humans have our own toroidal energy, an energy field that surrounds us. Heart Math Institute's done a lot of interesting research on this. And this can extend out to several feet. And in a lot of their research, what they've done, and it's very true. You just kind of think about, oh yeah, it's happened to me several times, where you're in a room, your back is to the door, somebody walks in, you don't hear them, but you feel suddenly that there's somebody else in the room with me.
Right.
And you turn around and somebody's there. It's because you felt their energy as they walked into the room. Well, what's happening here when we're waking up in the middle of the night, and anybody who has small children will completely understand this. Your child wakes up in the middle of the night and they come to your bed because they had a bad dream, they need a glass of water, need to go to the bathroom, whatever it is. And my kids were notorious for not tapping me on the shoulder or, trying to stir me awake or whatever. A lot of times they would just stand there and watch. My youngest on camera was notorious for that. And all of a sudden I would just, stir awake and say, "Oh, Cameron, what are you doing there?" Yeah. And he'd tell me what he wanted. He used to use the bathroom or had a bad dream or whatever. Like, okay, take care of it. But what actually woke me, because he didn't touch me.
Right.
Well, I felt his energy right there. I felt his presence right beside the bed. And so I think that's what's happening with these shadow entities, is that, people while they're asleep are feeling the presence of the shadow person in the room. And they wake up because they feel that energy there. But sometimes when they wake like that, they end up in a sleep paralysis state. And so they're in sleep paralysis. They see the shadow entity standing there, the thing that woke them up. And now all of a sudden they're frightened because they're not immediately thinking shadow person. They're thinking there's somebody in the house, there's an intruder. So, suddenly they're very frightened about what's going on, and all the emotions start running and everything just starts to compound. So that's what's going on here in these cases.
Yeah. And you were saying in the medical world, they kind of piss you off with just kind of dismissing it as hallucinations. And I've worked in medicine for 20 years, and specifically emergency medicine. And that's kind of a normal thing, because medical people like to put things in boxes like a lot of people do. And so, yeah, you got to have an explanation for this, because we're tasked with knowing what to do, how to fix people. And there's certain ways you do things. And so you don't really talk about the paranormal stuff. And if they do, they try to explain it like that, like saying, well, they're just having you're just having a waking dream or hallucination with the sleep paralysis.
Right. And I totally understand that. And as humans, you're right. We do like to try to compartmentalize things because, it's easier for us to think things through. And in a lot of cases, it makes living more efficient. But then you have these cases where, compartmentalizing, it doesn't necessarily work.
Right. Especially in the paranormal.
Right. Exactly.
And there's other phenomena like Bigfoot and like the missing 411 stuff. There's clusters of, you know, these missing people, and there's clusters of Bigfoot sightings and clusters of other things. Have you found that the shadow people phenomena is clustered around these same areas or clustered in their own way?
You know what I've actually found is that it's everywhere. This is phenomena that has been experienced by people all over the world for millennia. So you go back into ancient history and you're finding these cultures that had no connection to each other from all parts of the world actually reporting the same phenomena. So yeah, I don't really see clusters. I see this phenomenon happening everywhere.
I've seen some things out there, other people that have written books on shadow people and even in like the alien community, they want to connect shadow people to aliens. Do you connect shadow people with any other phenomena, or do you think it's just strictly spirits and interdimensional beings?
I think there could be a variety of different things. Yeah, spirits and interdimensional beings; those are really my top two. But they certainly could be extraterrestrials. We talked earlier about observation. That these things are watching, and it could very well be that, and maybe the ETs have learned how to travel interdimensionally. So we may be, almost using two different terms for describing the same thing, interdimensional being. Well, maybe some of those are actually ET interdimensional beings, so that could be.
Right.
But, you kind of think about, okay, let's say that there's a craft up there and an ET has come down and they want to know more about our people and our planet and all that. I mean, essentially what we would do is we're going to watch and observe first before we, interact and do a lot of things. So, it could be, perhaps that they've utilized some sort of cloaking device they're not seeing while they're making these observations, but they don't fully understand our physicality and our physiology, and their cloaking device doesn't completely work with the way our eyes receive light. So they end up coming off as some sort of shadow, or some people report seeing a shimmer man, that sort of thing. It's kind of almost the same thing with time travelers. So if somebody is traveling from another point in time and they don't necessarily want to be seen, perhaps they're doing the same sort of thing, still coming off as a shadow, or perhaps we don't understand completely how that works, and maybe they are just standing in our world, but because of the way that time mechanism works, they're coming off as a shadow. They could be astral projections. They could be light beams. And people always, when I say light beams, what do you mean light beams? Well, when our eyes take in too much light, or that light goes beyond the spectrum of our vision, sometimes all we see is what's left in the middle. Okay, you work in the medical field. You probably heard both reports of people walking into a room with somebody who's on their deathbed and seeing one, light beings surrounding the person, or two, shadow beings surrounding the person. Well,
yeah.
What if those shadows are actually still the light beings, but the light that's emanating from them is beyond what our eyes can see at that point, and all you're seeing is what's left in the middle. Like if you look at a light bulb too long, you start to your eyes at some point no longer see the light, and all you see is like this silhouette of a light bulb.
Right.
So it could be that kind of thing happening there. So there's a lot of different things that these, or a lot of different types of entities these things could be.
And a few weeks ago, I talked to Michelle Belanger about energy vampires, and we talked about, because she identifies herself as a vampire, a psychic vampire, and I've heard you talk about some of these shadow figures maybe being energy vampires.
Yeah, that's an idea there for most typically the hat wearing type entities, that they may actually be energy vampires, that they appear in somebody's room, maybe at the end of the bed, next to the bed, what have you, strike fear into the person and feed off of the energy of that fear. That's the primary I guess the primary function that's usually attributed to the hat entities, although they could have other motives as well, but that's a trait that usually gets ascribed to them.
Yeah, I just find that interesting. Like I said, I had a conversation with her about living energy vampires and that type of stuff. So I found it interesting when I come across that researching that you were talking about them possibly being some sort of manifestation that's an energy vampire as well.
Yeah, it makes sense, because what's your reaction when you wake up in the night and you see something like that? Immediately you're alarmed. You go into kind of fight or flight mode, and your adrenaline is rushing. So yeah, it absolutely makes sense.
And you also have a podcast where you talk about shadow people and lots of other phenomena. And you have a new docu-series that you've been working on. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, the docu-series, The Shadow Dimension, should be out here in spring 2021. It's basically what we're doing here is we're doing a deeper dive into the shadow phenomena by going to locations with reported shadow activity and seeing if we can't discover something a little more about these type of entities. It was a little bit difficult doing that project with COVID this past year. That really delayed a lot of things, and there are a lot of locations that I've been trying to line up and just couldn't get to. But I was able to get out to the Conjuring house, the farmhouse in Harrisville that the movie The Conjuring is based off of, and I was able to get out to Mineral Springs Hotel in Alton, Illinois, where that's basically the location where I saw the rolling black smoke morph into a little girl. So hitting some of these locations that have this reported activity, and I have other experts in the field weighing in on this because we get into the different ideas and concepts of what these things are. And the locations that we're going to have reported vortex and portal activity. So how do these different ideas of the universe and how energy works with the earth, how do they perhaps fuel some of these locations to spawn this activity or help energize this activity that's going on there? So yeah, definitely look forward to that this coming spring. We just released the trailer about a week ago, so that's up there now, and people can find that at shadowdimension.com.
And you also have another website called the Connected Universe Portal, and you do courses through that.
Yeah, Connected Universe Portal. That just came out here at the end of January, and you're right. So we're doing courses out there. Actually, I have to take a step back here. Haven't quite yet released the first course, which will be on shadow entities, but we have the membership side of the site that is already up, which has a lot of articles in there, has Q&A videos, has some vlogging videos, behind the scenes clips and sneak peeks from the shadow dimension, and a lot more material. Also, you get access to the full live stream of Beyond the Shadows, which is one of the weekly podcasts that I do, but the video version and where I interact with the audience on that, or the viewers, that's through the Connected Universe Portal. So we have a lot of things going on out there, and there's a whole message board type forum community where we interact with each other. So yeah, lots going on out there, and we'll continue to expand that.
And you have a huge website at MikeRicksecker.com that you can listen to podcasts, you can find your books, and there's lots of information about shadow figures and investigations you've done and different things like that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. MikeRicksecker.com. That's where you can find my books. I have other articles out there. And we have the link to the Ireland trip up there, which actually got pushed to next year. Yeah, and the other podcast I do is Enter the Rabbit Hole, which is Tuesday nights. You can find that one on YouTube. So yeah, I have a lot going on.
And I'll put links to all that stuff in the show notes for the audience to find, and they can also find your books on Kindle, Amazon, and wherever they find books as well. Do you have anything else coming up in the future?
Well, I kind of threw the Ireland thing out there. So that is a tour that we're doing in Ireland of, we got seven different castles in there. We're hitting some different stone circles. We have some overnight paranormal investigations there, like at Leap Castle. We have Spike Island, which is basically like the Alcatraz of Ireland, all to ourselves for an entire night, which is going to be fantastic. So that is going to be July 1st through the 9th next year. So yeah, definitely check that out. You can find out more information about that at mysteriousAdventurestours.com.
And the Shadow Dimension docuseries, do you know where that's going to be available when it comes out?
Yeah, that'll be streaming on Amazon Prime.
Awesome. I'm looking forward to it. And I've had an awesome time talking to you about shadow people. It's always something that has fascinated me. And I appreciate you coming on today.
Yeah, absolutely. Anytime. Absolutely appreciate it.
Everybody, like I said, I'll put links in the show notes to all of Mike's websites and content. And go to his website to find out more, and listen to his podcast to find out more about shadow people if it intrigues you as much as it does me. All right. Thanks again, Mike, for coming on today.
All right. Thanks so much. Again, I appreciate it.
All right, everybody. Thanks for listening. And as always, stay safe out there. Have a good day. Join us next time for a new episode of The Unseen Paranormal. Until then, check us out on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or at our website, unseenparanormalpodcast.com. And don't forget to like, review, rate, and share with all your friends. Thank you to my friend Chris Lips for the awesome theme music. Listen to our theme song and more of his music at chrislipsmusic.com. And remember, some of the scariest things are unseen.